Hello everybody, welcome to the channel. This is a new series for this channel and it will contain discussions, hopefully constructive ones, and I would like to go a step further than the classical debate kind of environment. And while we will not stray away and we will not stop debating and eventually contradicting and discussing opposite point, I would like to see if while doing this we can also come to a sort of agreement, conclusion, and some sort of cooperation, even though we are on opposite sides. We might find ourselves on opposite sides of the spectrum. So, as for today's episode and the first episode, our guest is Alex Kirsch from Alex Kirsch Project. Hello, Alex.
Hello, Moff. How are you today?
I'm doing fine, thank you. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, my name is Alex Kirsch, and I am the host of the podcast Depth of Perspective, where the truth has no bias. It is a social issues based podcast where I interview either a expert or a person with direct experience with the topic at hand. So I try to release at least one episode at least every 2 weeks, or at least one episode a month when I get around to it. But I also do reaction videos on my YouTube channel. Just look up the Alex Kirsch Project on YouTube, and you'll find my podcast on there, and you'll find some of my old content on there as well.
Oh, awesome. So, for today's topic, uh, originally I was thinking that I'm not necessarily fond of capitalism. I understand some of its benefits, but I kind of up until this moment of my life and with what I've learned and read and see through in from my experiences, I would say I'm not convinced that capitalism is the best available system and this is the best humanity in 2021 is capable of. Okay, but I would also say that what we've seen as socialism, although it had some good points in certain on certain aspects, it was really great. It also had plenty of flaws, and we also saw him ultimately failing in the fall of the communist regime all over Eastern Europe. Okay, so I would also say that yes, some things are great under the socialist communist regimes, but there are plenty of things which are not. And also, there are things which can be improved. And my proposal for today's topic would be, hey, let's see what you are again from your perspective as a capitalist, if you consider that this is the system that we should implement tomorrow and in 5 and 10 years and the next decades, or if you have qualms and issues with the capitalist system, which are, and what would you like to improve?
Okay, was that the question?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah. A
okay,
bit of an intro and also question.
gotcha. Okay, so I would consider myself a responsible capitalist because I know that capitalism has its flaws, just like any other economic system out there. But when I look at capitalism, I'm a firm believer that it causes people to be innovative. It gives entrepreneurs the power to create a product, a service, or a product that people want, a commodity that people can actually need. You've seen how such businesses have created massive amounts of wealth and has guaranteed people to get work, essentially. If you create a commodity, for example, if you created a commodity or a service or a product that people want and need, and you're successful for that, you should be rewarded for this. My only real stipulation is to make sure that you're doing this in an ethical behavior, meaning that you are paying the workers that you have underneath you, your employees. You, as a responsible business owner and a responsible manager, should be making sure that you're taking care of your employees, meaning that you're making sure that they have enough money to pay for food, to pay for their housing, to pay for their insurance, what have you. Capitalism may not be perfect, but I have seen how capitalism and innovation has actually created better societies. We can make the point about there being massive wealth inequality, but I think the biggest problem that people have with capitalism, it's not so much that of capitalism itself, but just the corrupt people that are in capitalism.
Okay. If I may interject, are you a capitalist or do you own capital? What on a scale from 0 to 10, how much of a capitalist are you?
Well,
Outside of being of sympathizing with the ideology and the
mhm.
system.
Well, I don't own capital, honestly. So that's one thing. If you ask a question like that, I don't own any capital, but I am in full support of capitalism. I would definitely put myself like probably 9 out of 10 when it comes down to supporting capitalism. I couldn't even go as far as 8, considering some of the problems that I've seen that capitalism has created in some parts. But mostly, I just think that's just because of corruption and government not stepping in when they should step in to, uh, prevent these people from becoming so corrupt, both ethically and morally.
Okay. Well, yeah, this is one of the first things that I, in a discussion with someone that says, "Hey, I'm on the side of capitalism," is something that I like to bring up because people usually say, "Hey, I like capitalism," but A, they don't own capital, and that's a bit of mixed, sends out mixed signals. And the second one is sort of, hey, we like capitalism, but capitalism has plenty of corruption. Okay, and where is the line? Why don't you draw the line and say, hey, capitalism has too much corruption?
I think that's just a human behavior, honestly. It's something that can be taught, and it's something that when people anybody can be corrupt. It doesn't matter if you're a socialist or a capitalist or a communist. You could consider yourself a good one, but then you could find your next door neighbor could also be the same economic ideology as you, but they're morally bankrupt completely. And I think people tend to get the two mixed up. They tend to equate capitalism as like the root of all evil because of greed, but greed can happen at any economic ideology if you look at it. I mean, you can have a greedy socialist, you can have a greedy communist.
Definitely, I totally agree with you, and that's another. That was the second point. That is the second point I'm bringing up,
Mhm.
because I say that one reason the socialist system, communist party system in former Soviet Union and amongst the former Soviet Union countries collapsed was due in part or due to greed. People were too greedy in those parties. They tried to amass wealth. They tried to put only their friends in power. They tried to do everything for their own benefit and forgot to do things for the masses, and whatever they promised to bring better quality of life, they partially succeeded in that, but ultimately I consider that the greed and personal interest of individuals and group of individuals was higher than their supposedly the goals of communism or whatever doctrine they were promoting, and ultimately they failed. And my question maybe more specifically was or is like, why don't we let capitalism fail? Because I would say that, hey, if we look at, I don't know, Bill Gates and Microsoft, that company was utterly corrupt and was engaging in corrupt practices overseas, bribing governments to be the sole or let's say the main uh, not deliver the main source of software, and they would go to bribe government officials in those countries. Other corporations do the same tactics and maybe under different names. Okay, but ultimately they are corrupt. So my question would be, hey, shouldn't we let them, fail and outlaw them and try to reset the system with better laws, which better protect the citizens and of course allow you to do your stuff, to innovate, to employ, to what was your formula of capitalism, a fair capitalism? Or
Responsible capitalism, socially responsible
yeah,
capitalism, as it's called.
yeah. So why shouldn't we push for these companies, the existing companies, to kind of be outlawed or let them fail, because ultimately they failed, and implement your version of capitalism, a responsible one.
Well, as I looked up into Microsoft, they're actually doing quite well as far as taking care of their workers. They actually make sure that their workers are paid decent wages. They're also make sure that they actually have good benefits to go along with it, mostly because they can afford these because they have such great capital right there. They're still one of the most successful software companies in the world right now. And we can look at the corruption right there. If you want to seed out the corruption in a business, I'm in full agreement with you. But I don't think an entire business should fail just because of these corrupt people. And now, if that takes the business down with it, well, so be it right there. But the best part about it is that somebody then can create another commodity, somebody can create another system and learn from the mistakes of the last capitalist that failed completely or let their business fail and then create something better. That's the best part about it. It's the innovation to learn from your mistakes in order to correct the mistakes that were made to make things better. Because you've got major corporations, like people like to complain about Walmart, right? How it's the most
Mm-hmm.
successful corporation in the world right now. The Walton family are worth over $100 billion by themselves. But then you've also got the owner of Costco. The owner of Costco ensures that all of his employees are paid good wages. Like it's much higher than the national average. Last time I checked, they also made sure that they have their child care provided. They also make sure that they have their what's it called, daycare. They make sure that their health insurance is taken care of. They've got dental. They've got 401ks if they want them. There's a lot of businesses out there that are doing quite well that happen to be capitalist, and that's because they understand good, proper business practices. And if they fail, that's because they fail on their own accord. And if the government finds out that they've been corrupt in their dealings, then absolutely, I'm a firm believer there's no such thing as too big to fail or too big to jail.
Oh, okay. Well, see, this is my specification. When I was talking about
Mhm.
Microsoft, I was specifically talking about Microsoft's practices in outside the USA, when they specifically came in the 90 after the 90s, 90s, early 2000, and they came to Eastern European countries, and they bribed government officials to kind of convince them to buy Microsoft license and implement those Microsoft license and do all this shady work. And with the Costco example, I totally agree. I've also read that they are paying their employees, and that's specifically their policy. They believe in something like, if we pay our employees well, they will stay, and we won't be in this forever engaged in searching for new personnel and trying to shift. We won't go. There is a term for ex- searching for new people. Anyway, so I totally agree. Costco should be rewarded, but we shouldn't maybe be so kind to let Walmart live. Maybe we should kind of force Walmart out and let the market come up with somebody else come up with a similar company, a company which has similar values to Costco. Why not?
Okay. But here's my question though. How would you go about forcing Walmart to close? Like, what would be the justification behind doing that? I'm just curious.
They don't pay a living wage. And
Okay.
you see, I'm not talking about like small companies, moms and pops shops. I'm talking someone at the level of fortune of the owner of Walmart or Amazon, Jeff Bezos, the classical example,
Hmm.
because there were these stories about the employees
Hmm.
being in the battle. Okay, and I would go as far as proposing why shouldn't we say, hey, Mr. Bezos, what you doing? Well, I'm forcing my employees to be in a battle. Okay, 40% of your fortune is taken from you right now. Okay, if next year there is again a case in which we find, I don't know, employees with diapers or some other evil stuff, we'll take 40% out of your fortune.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's very, very drastic measures. Should we advocate for this kind of extreme measures to really, really punish? Because otherwise, if you give Bezos and Amazon, I don't know, 100,000 fine or 1 million fine, that's nothing. Okay, so why shouldn't we impose more harsher penalties for this kind of what I would call evil thing done on human?
So basically, it would sort of like be the equivalent of like putting some sort of sanction on them for their shady business practices. Now, if you'd want to talk about an ethical way of doing that, first off, you'd have to ensure the politicians that you've elected ensure that happens, guaranteeing that there's not going to be a deal made where they're just going to, pay out or like settle out of court. You would actually have to make sure that something like this actually gets followed up upon. But I think the only reason why that's not going to happen is because Jeff Bezos, even though, yes, I don't agree with his business practices, he's probably got enough corporate lawyers to that get paid more than any one of us will actually make in our entire lives. But they get paid for a reason, to ensure that he just kind of pushes the boundary just enough to where the government isn't going to necessarily step in. Now, a person can try to sue Amazon, which I wish them the best of luck, because once again, they're just going to keep them tangled up in court long enough where they can't pay their lawyers long enough. Now, if you want to talk about finding ways to kind of get past those loopholes that Amazon might have, I'm in full agreement. However, I kind of just go back to this point. If the government starts to get too involved, right? Let's say, for example, you're going to say, "Oh, well, this corporation is corrupt because of A, B, and C." As long as you're able to prove the corruption, you're not going to hear a peep out of the people. But then the second that governments start reaching out and start just completely sanctioning all different kinds of businesses, I think that's the fear that a lot of capitalists might actually have. It's like, well, wait a second. These guys are trying to jump down the throat of this business for not doing anything wrong, actually. I mean, that's like it's kind of a double-edged sword. But as far as getting corruption, I'm full agreement with you. Getting rid of corruption, it's just the means of how do we get rid of corruption. You just want to have, okay, well, sorry, because you are allowing your employees to pee in a bottle, we're just going to take 40% of your income right now. I mean, is that kind of like
But
what you're thinking about doing?
yeah, exactly. This is wouldn't you agree, or would you agree, or you would disagree that this is something sensible? Because I'm not saying, hey, from even before you start your business, I'm gonna take 40% of something that you didn't make. No, I'm gonna let you run your business. I will have faith that you are a honest human being with with values and morals and good work ethics, and let you run your business. But if after 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, employees start coming out with these stories, then I would send somebody to ask, hey, dude, what's happening? Or did it or whatever. Say, what is going on? Well, okay, solve it and let's hear of it. Let's not hear about it again. But if things arise again, and it's not like, of course, Jeff Bezos, I totally agree with you, has like insane this insane piles of money to pay like insane armies of lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
But if he affords to pay very well and very well established lawyers, why doesn't he also uses his fortune to create better conditions for his employees? No?
That again, I think that just kind of goes back to not necessarily him being a capitalist. I just think he probably just doesn't really care, honestly. I mean, look, he just paid like an insane amount of money in his what's it called? His divorce with his wife. I mean, she became like the richest woman overnight, essentially. I
Mhm.
maybe because I've seen people like on social media approach Jeff Bezos and he completely ignores them. So we can all pretty much agree that Jeff Bezos isn't exactly the nicest business guy on the block. This is something we can all agree on. So, but like I said, I completely agree. If we got to have some sort of checks and balances to find out if this business is practicing ethically and making sure their employees are taken care of. If they're not, then absolutely you should find some way to hold them accountable. I mean, I have to say I think the biggest problem, though, once again, is it's not so much people want to go after capitalists because of their corruptness. I just think sometimes people want to go after capitalists just because they're successful, because I see it all the time, honestly. I mean, I'm not saying that's you in this case, but that seems to be the biggest argument right there. I mean, you could correct me if I'm wrong,
Oh,
actually.
yeah. Can you clarify what do you mean they go after successful capitalists?
Well, every time I see like successful business people, like for example, you've got like Kevin O'Leary, who's from Shark Tank. You've got like the Mark Cubans. These guys are worth billions of dollars, and then you'll have people ask this question: "Is like, do you think that they actually deserve that money?" And I will tell you, yes, they do. It's like even though they don't do half of the work, it's like, well, a lot of the work these guys do, and these major CEOs do, is stuff that we never see or hear about. Now, we can make the same argument that Jeff Bezos doesn't do nearly an eighth of the work that the common worker does. But at the same time, though, he created that business from the ground up. I mean, and I think he's just kind of lost his way and probably has so much money he doesn't really care. I mean, for crying out loud, he just bought his own ticket to go into outer space, for crying out loud. It's just, which is
Oh, yeah,
ridiculous.
yeah. Well, actually, for that rocket to go out of space, he used lots of public funded funds. You
Hmm.
know, your taxpayer money. So that's especially considering the amount of wealth Bezos has to use public funds. That's a bit of like, come on, Jeff, what are you doing?
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
I question what people like that do all the time. But at the end of the day, and this might sound like a terrible thing, what some people do with their money, I hate to say it, but it's just really none of my business what some people do, because if I make a lot of money, I don't want people infringing upon what I spend my money on right there. It sucks. It's a competitive world out there, because you've got wealthy people all across the world that didn't earn their income. Like, for example, a person that's a member of royalty, they didn't earn that income right there. It's just inherited to them, and they're
yeah,
spending like fat cats too.
true, true. I totally agree with the
Hmm.
royalty. Like they should be outlawed instantly. But my
Hmm.
problem is you saying that, hey, look, I like this capitalist and their big money and their big fortune and so on and so forth. I wouldn't have a problem with people amassing large amounts of money. Okay, so
Hmm.
that's not necessarily. I don't see, hey, this dude, this person has huge amounts of money, therefore he is evil.
Hmm.
I have a problem when these people with very large amounts of money start engaging in shady business behavior, shady
Hmm.
practices. They start going hand in hand with the government and creating bad, evil conditions for you and me, which we don't have capital, we don't have the same amount of power, we don't have the same amount of connections, and they kind of start passing laws and the other things.
Yeah, and that's
Normatives and other smaller type of legislations, which shifts very highly, imposes high shifts in how things go and in the balance of power, and then that balance of power, it's not that balanced anymore, and it becomes disembalanced and even a very high one.
well, yeah, and you're talking about like lobbyists that essentially
Hmm.
contribute campaigns. Like in the United States, if I'm not mistaken, my numbers could be off, but I think the most you can contribute is like $10,000 for your presidential campaign. I could be wrong, but that's the last number that I checked right there. But these people are essentially buying influence into the government. Now, if you want to get rid of lobbyists, yeah, I agree. Get rid of lobbyists. If they want to pay just as the individual person, not as a corporation, I'm game for that, because that has been quite a big issue. There's people that argue about the pharmaceutical industry that gets involved with the government. There's people that argue about the National Rifle Association that gets involved in government. There's a lot of these political action groups that get involved, and they raise enough money right there that just to donate to their campaign of choice, which I feel that that's one of the biggest corruptions within the United States system right there. It's just it's really hard to get rid of because it's so well established. And I think we could do better, honestly, if we could get a lot of this money out of government. But it's kind of like this this usage of terms we say is like, I could crap in one hand, wish in the other, which one do you think is going to fill up faster? Kind of, and I hate to be a real pessimist about it, but I just see what's going on in the world. But anyway, go ahead. You were to say something?
Yeah, that was the point, because ultimately, like, how the conversation between us is going, and if, let's say, it's reflective of how the outside world is moving,
Mm-hmm.
we are literally kind of resigning. We are entering in a sort of defeatist state,
Mm-hmm.
self-defeating, and say, like, yes, big corporations have huge amounts of power.
Mm-hmm.
Lobbyists have huge amounts of power. Politicians are working hand in hand with the big corporations, and we don't have power. We don't have anything. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and this is a point in time where I think we should draw a line, maybe in the proverbial sand, and say, hey, that's enough. I want my rights back. If I go to court with Amazon, I don't want to consider that Amazon can pay 100 millions, billions to its lawyers, and I barely afford someone, on the low scale, where I have to go through the pity of the entire country to finance my lawyer and my professional defense. Okay, because the way the system, the justice system, and the laws system is designed, you as a single person, without, even if you are smart, you would have an insanely hard and difficult time to come up with the same type of quality defense the likes of Amazon lawyers can provide, and their paralegals and all the mechanism. So I would say, come on, let's draw the line and say, hey, Amazon, if I sue you on this being in the battle matter, you aren't allowed to pay your lawyers or to use very high expensive lawyers, and you should get going with the public lawyer. Otherwise, the insane amount of money, which I totally agree, isn't evil by itself. Okay, because it's like the Bible saying money is the root of all evils. Actually, no, love of money and the way money are used is the root of all evil. Because money ultimately is just an object. So let's level the playing field. Let's put Amazon on the same level as you and me. Okay, what can you afford? Maybe the public lawyer, publicly assigned lawyer or something. Let's say, hey, Amazon, if you go and take on the little guy, you'll use a publicly assigned lawyer, and that's that. But it is harsh. It is might sound extreme, but I believe it is the sort of idea that could bring again equality between us and them.
That would be great, but you're going to have a hell of a time trying to get that passed, especially in this country, because it's. I'm pretty sure like each lawyer that would get is going to find a loophole around that, and that's a really really tall order to make. Would something like that happen? Absolutely. I did actually remember seeing a story about how Wells Fargo actually went after one homeowner, and they tried to sue a homeowner, but yet the homeowner found out that they did some corrupt business, so he sued them right back, and that Wells Fargo bank actually had to close its doors because they lost all their money in this lawsuit. So it's one of those rare cases where it's possible. There was a gentleman that fought against the Ford company, if I'm not mistaken, because he created like the delayed windshield wiper system. He's one of those rare cases where somebody determined enough. But I think what some people do is when they take on these major corporations will actually say, well, guess what? We'll settle out of court. We'll give you $20 million, PPC dollar signs, and then just go for it. And I think that could be part of the problem too. People just see the dollar signs like, you know what? I've never had this much money before my entire life. Let's go for it. I think people just see the dollar signs right off the bat. So it's kind of like the human condition, wouldn't you say, where people just see the money and just go for the money without taking the extra steps. Do you think?
Sure, totally agree. But for example, from now on, would you like promote this kind of I know it sounds strange, and it sounds sort of I don't know, maybe Marxist or socialism, everybody is equal, but equalitarian type of attitude, because if I cannot afford the $2 million per hour fee to pay to the lawyers, why should I be at a disadvantage? Why should rich people have better defense than me, the ordinary person? Okay, how is that just? That's not just. That's exactly the
It
opposite
isn't.
of just.
Oh,
That's
it really isn't. I mean, it's an unfair system, but at the same time, here's another term I use. It is what it is, and it sucks. Honestly, I would love to see a system where not necessarily where everybody's forced to be equal. Where I think that's where kind of like where you and I are probably going to differ, where the system forces people to be evil, because then you have to ask this question: the people that are forcing things to be equal, are they going to practice what they preach? And I'm going to go with history showing that no, they're not. They're going to force everybody else to be equal, but then the people that make these decisions are going to keep themselves in their ivory towers. That's where the problem really lies, in my belief.
well, at first, what I'm advocating is
Mhm.
for this inequality between very rich and powerful entities and your average citizen to
Mhm.
disappear. That would be a first step. What I can afford. I can afford your publicly assigned lawyer,
Mhm.
defense lawyer, okay? Attorney, what's the terminology? Okay, I would like for the very rich, wealthy corporate or whatever entity to have the same type of lawyer as me. And that's that. I'm not saying to have no lawyer or Bezos to represent himself in the in the court of law of something, but that's what I'm saying. Hey, let's take it on the same level of things, because other or no, but that was because otherwise we would need to, in order to sort of use the system as a way to increase the amount of lawyers I can afford or the value per hour or the quality, then I would have kind of be forced to ask for the government intervention, and that's a big no. No, if I can only afford the publicly assigned lawyer, then this corporation should be forced to use the same type of lawyer. And there is that.
Has this ever been tried in a country before?
No, but why shouldn't we try it? What could go wrong? I know, yeah, don't answer
Yeah, I
that.
mean, well, but that's the $1 million question right there, isn't, no pun intended. It's just, you have to have a proof of concept in order to make something like, I mean, because it's like I said, I think it's a good idea to have their lawyers and like have you to have fair representation, but under the eyes of the law, you have a lawyer, whether it's a public defender, and therefore you have equal representation, which it may not seem that way. And that could just very well be just the justice system once again failing, essentially. But it's not so much the justice system failing, it's just the elite that continues to bring this forward, because you can be a politician and have an army of lawyers at your disposal, and you've never owned a business in your entire life. This person's not a capitalist, but they still attained massive amounts of wealth simply by the influence that they spread, and they built an army of lawyers that they have at their disposal. I mean, it's once again, this is why I say it's more a system, the corrupt people that you'd have to worry about, not necessarily just the capitalist in general, because you know I'm a firm believer that responsible capitalism, it may not advocate for a system to where, because they would definitely have their team of lawyers, but that's because if I'm a business owner, if I'm a multi-billionaire, and if I get taken to court, I'm going to want the best lawyer that I can possibly wield to throw at my opponent, because the main point is to win in this case. And I know it seems really unfair, and even I might think and it might be hypocritical for me to say it's kind of a jacked up system right there. But honestly, I take it from their point of view, especially if I'm running a decent business. But yeah, so.
See, that's what I believe most of the
Mhm.
people that are advocating for socialism or communism are seeing this very weird stance. On one side, you do agree with me that the system is corrupt and it's built on inequality and evil, borderline evil, if not directly evil. But on the other hand, you are not advocating for a change because, for example, up until this moment, I never said, "Hey, let's implement socialism or let's implement
Mhm.
communism because they will definitely solve it. They are better." La la la, yada yada yada.
Yeah,
Okay, I'm having a discussion with you. Hey, look,
sure.
this is a problem. Can we change it? Okay, and we both agree that this is a problem, and the system right now it's evil, but we are not agreeing on enacting, asking for a change. Because, for example, we can, gather a group of people, couple of hundreds or maybe 1,000, and say, hey, let's ask some lawyers to provide some hours of work, and let's
Mhm.
try to enact this. We shall take a famous case from the history and say, hey, look, this is the corporation X versus your plain average person, and let's see what would be different if the same case would be argued by two completely at the same level, completely equal uh, lawyers, okay, instead of corporate big law firm or something versus your average individual. Okay, and let's see what's happened. It could be a theoretical case, absolutely, but
Mhm.
we can have some data. We can have, sort of
You
the kind of experiment, and yeah.
my only thing is you have to have a proof of concept in order to prove something this could work, because you could have that same group of people that come together with a team of lawyers who try to push something like this through, and they could just fail all across the board. It's all about, and here's the reason why. It's not so much that I don't want it to change. It's just how you're going to affect this change. And I feel like the best way is for people to see, for example, I believe that a company that recognizes its mistakes and fixes itself should be rewarded. Like Tylenol, they had a problem where some of their medication was like, I can't remember what it was. There was something like there was wrong, like tainted medication. So what they did is they did a complete recall of all their product. This is back in the 80s or 90s. And after they did that recall, people had their faith in Tylenol once again, and it's still one of the most reliable, uh, um, products to buy from. And to me, that's that, especially if a company that recognizes that it was wrong and fixes itself. Now, how do we go about stopping a company? If you want a group of people to get together and to grab a bunch of lawyers to come up with something, they would have a very, very heavy task on their plate, because they have to find how it is in accordance with the Constitution, proper business practices. There's a lot of things they kind of have to take into is that. Now, if they want to try this, I say go for it. I have no problem with it, but there's no guarantee that it is going to work. And that's kind of the deal in a capitalist system. There are no guarantees. I could have a successful shoe company today and something bad could happen and I could lose everything overnight, depending on where I spend my money, how I spend my money. I could go to Vegas tomorrow, throw it all away, and my business will never recover. And then I'm pretty much SOL, crap out of luck. And that's, I think it kind of comes a lot into knowledge of your product, knowledge of how you built your business, how much you know about your business, how much you know about your employees. There's so much into this. I honestly think it's just, I think we just tend to focus on like all the bad corporations because they're the ones that get the most attention. But what about the good corporations? Maybe that's just what I'd like to know. I know that's
Well,
probably
no,
I just threw a lot at you. I'm sorry. So
yeah, it's okay. It's okay to
Mhm.
get with what you're saying in the beginning with regard of my previous idea. Well, I'm not saying that it's going to be easy, but if you look right after the next corner, it's a bunch of peoples from the extreme far left screaming for let's implement communism, let's bring on the what was the cooperatives, let's bring
yeah,
Soviet Union again, and all
worker
this
co-ops.
other stuff. Yeah, worker co-ops and so on. Okay, so they're right beyond the corner, and I'm not saying let's go with that. I'm not saying let's not go
Hmm.
with that. I'm saying that we need to enact a change, and that change needs to be a huge one. So yeah, you are correct in saying, hey, this is a very difficult topic, and we should treat it seriously. But I say that it's something that we should do, and it's a task that we should take upon us, we shall say, hey,
Mhm.
let's do this, because not because it's easy, but because it's hard, or some sort of cliche line like that. But
That's
it's
fair.
during our life, it's during our lifetime, and we can make a test at least. Bring some lawyers together, give them their task, and they can come up with opinions, even if it doesn't come up to an end, but we can still have a way better understanding of how much of a change this kind of idea would require, or and if we can have a next best, what's if this is like too difficult to accomplish, what would be the next best thing in order to make these trials or these cases stand on really on way more equal terms, then because otherwise what's the alternative? To say, well, we shouldn't because it's hard, and I
Mhm.
don't know, that doesn't sound
No,
very,
that's
you know.
that's fair. I mean, I'm not saying people shouldn't try. People should definitely try. I just think it's a real heavy task right there. That's all I'm really saying. And I think I would just need to see the actual practice take place. That's just my own. That's the only reason I was bringing that up. I'm just
Mhm.
I want, if people feel like they could come, like for example down in uh Bessemer, Alabama, the people that want at the Amazon factory, they fought to get unionization. They came together to want to be better representative, which I'm in full support of unions, honestly, because they're guaranteeing that the workers are taken care of. Like my father-in-law, when he worked at GM, the union that he had, the union advocate made sure that they were all paid a good wage, which I'm in full agreement with. Um, Now I know what happened in Bessemer didn't exactly go according to plan, but then again, we don't really know all the details of why it failed. But um, I just think a lot of the people that always scream that they want to enact socialism or communism, a lot of the people I've talked to about, they've never been to these places. I've known people that have escaped from these places, like the socialist or the Cuban or like communist regimes, because of like how their governments are. And every discussion I've ever had with people that have actually escaped from it, they say it's awful, it's terrible. And then the people that want communism and socialism brought to the United States have never even been to a socialist or communist country. I mean, I find that very, very what's it called? What's the word? I find it a little odd, honestly. I mean, I don't know if that's the route you want to go with this, but
Yeah, no, I'm okay with that. Uh,
Mhm.
the thing is, I have an issue with people that come out from this come out from this space of former Soviet Union, or the from the
Mhm.
countries under the Soviet umbrella, the Soviet bloc.
Yeah.
And my thing is, these people could be speaking the truth, but they usually go A with the cliches,
Mhm.
and B, they present only a certain type of information, and not necessarily. I definitely do not want to diminish their experience when
Yep.
those experiences are genuine and they spoke from a proper experience and with proper understanding of the topic. But my issue is with these people. If you like, let's make it a bit personal. Alex,
Sure.
you are from the United States.
Yes.
Suddenly the United States government turns very evil, dictatorial, and yada yada yada, and you flee to the to, you come to France or Eastern Europe or whatever, or to Australia. Okay, inevitably you're gonna complain, but
Mhm.
beyond the first layer of genuine things to complain about with regard with what was happening in the United States or in former Soviet Union, there would be like, you'd complain about one, two, three main topics, but there would be like six, seven other topics which you could say easily that they were okay, or even they weren't that bad. Okay, so my thing with people that come out from United Soviets,
Mhm.
okay, is not that they lie, is the fact that they leave so much out of the story, or as they do on TV, they only show you like 30 seconds of what they discuss, and they cut all the other like 5 minutes, and much of their experience is lost. Because like, you know, I kind of have a good experience, both first-hand relatives, studies, and so on. There was plenty of good things. There were some great things under the commies, but as well there were plenty of bad things or meh, and there were a couple of things which were bad and evil. But you wouldn't go around and say, "Hey, everything was evil." Okay, under the Soviets, that would be a gross exaggeration. Okay, and as well, whoever says that everything was well under the Soviets is grossly exaggerating, over exaggerating, and you know, on the other side
Mhm.
of the spectrum. So yes, there are people coming out from these spaces, but you really need to have a proper understanding of what was happening there. Otherwise, you'll be biased by their bias or something like that, if that makes sense.
So you're talking about their concrete experience may not be the same experience that you might have had or any members of your family might have had. That's kind of like what you're telling me, right?
I'm, let's take a case. You
Okay.
would have a case. The generic communist, the generic family living under the communists.
Okay.
They would have a house, an apartment,
Yep.
50 square meter, give or take. So
Okay.
was that 500 square yard feet or something?
I'm not good at stuff
Some,
like that, so
yeah,
I'll be
okay.
honest. So
It
we'll
was
go with that though. We'll go with square
a
feet,
second.
500 square feet. So
Yeah, I think that's roughly the same conversion. Uh, the parents would get jobs, they would get education,
Mhm.
the kids would get education, they would have the existing level access to the existing level of healthcare and public transport. They would have access to cinemas and pubs and cake shops and whatever, clothes and stuff like that. Okay, so generally you would have all the things that you would have access in the West, except some of the more expensive or exotic goods. Okay, but otherwise, overall, you would have the same stuff. I was born and raised in an apartment. Okay, so
Mhm.
my parents lived in an apartment, and we weren't like in huts made out of mud. Uh,
Mhm.
I went to a school and it was a pretty good school. A good teacher was some of them really awesome, and there were things that there were present, and I wouldn't go and say, "Hey, look, this education or this or that or like evil," and therefore it's my direct opinion. Now, the evil of a communist system is a bit more complex and insidious than saying, yes, I had bananas in access to banana. I could eat bananas under the communists, or I couldn't eat bananas under the communists. Okay, this is sort of a trope with
Yeah.
the communism. Okay, so the complexity and how the communist ideology affected population at large is something which is much more complex and insidious than simply saying, "Hey, sometimes there was shortages of food in shops."
Mhm.
Okay, that's an oversimplification, which unfortunately it doesn't paint the proper nor positive nor negative image picture of what really happened under the communism, and does it really, let's say, undermine both the successes and undermines and makes the evils very small, and because there are large evils under the communism, but not they, they are not properly expressed by sometimes there wasn't food in the shops. Okay, that was something inconvenient. The real size of what is evil, what was evil under the commies, it's on a whole different scale and type of language to necessary to properly express. Then we didn't eat bananas under the commies.
Well, here's my question though. Like, while the average citizen had everything they needed, like for example, they got like under communism, if I'm not mistaken, you get paid in accordance to what you need, correct? Like you only get paid according to your needs, right?
Are you talking about the theory or what was in practice?
No, what was in practice, like in your experience.
In practice, you would get a nice wage
Hmm.
and you could live by that wage. How the wage was really calculated, it depended and it, of course, varied. In theory, yes, that wage was backed up by Marxist theory
Yeah.
according to
So
certain, sorry, LTV
yeah.
value of work theory or something.
So here's where I'm just like a little fascinated by the people that, yeah, they might be living good, but then you look at their politicians, you look at the people that run their country, they're living like kings, while everybody, like some people may be living good, if I'm not mistaken. Like there was parts of China under Mao, some people were living good, but then you had people that died under starvation, and I believe this also happened in Russia. It happened in a few different countries, and those that didn't abide by these principles or spoke out against their government were drug out of their homes and executed like on the spot. And I know some people say,
Oh,
"Well, this didn't happen," but it's just, I'm
yeah,
halfway through
that's
the. I'm sorry.
that's a bit of an exaggeration.
Well, I mean, it did stuff like that happen though.
Yes, okay.
Mhm.
I will give you a link in private. There is a set of jokes like, yes, I know it's not really appropriate to make jokes about the crimes of the commies,
Mhm.
but you really need a certain level of complexity to properly discuss that. And
Mhm.
usually it goes like this. Was Radio Yerevan, and
Mhm.
it's more of a joke. There, it was a radio station. It existed under the commies, but
Mhm.
somehow these jokes around this radio station appeared, and they went something like. A citizen calls the radio station under the commies and ask, "Hey, hello, Radio Yerevan. Is it true that Anton Antonovich won a car at the chess contest?" And the Radio Yerevan answers, "Yes, it is correct. Anton Antonovich uh, indeed won a car, but it wasn't a car. It was more like a bicycle, and it wasn't given, but it was stolen from him."
Uh,
Okay, so
yeah.
yeah, that's the level. That's a very good representation from to on how to start looking at what is being told about the Soviet Union.
Mhm.
Is it true that that thing happened under the Soviets? Yes, it kind of did happen, but yes, and actually no, because it happened in the other way. Okay, so there were crimes, but it's I believe you are reading Solzhenitsyn, Gulag
Yeah. Gulag
Archipelago.
Archipelago. Gulag Archipelago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like halfway through it. So
Okay. Have you come by the passage, or was in another Solzhenitsyn book in which he goes on and says that the Jews are at fault for communism?
I didn't get to that part. No.
Okay. Do search up Solzhenitsyn Jews, or,
Okay.
and it will come up. Okay. And there is this paragraph in which Solzhenitsyn writes very scolding words with regard of Jews. Okay. But now there are like, again, two aspects of this. Is it true? Yes, it is true. Plenty of the people who are very powerful and prominent in the beginning of the Communist Party were Jews. Okay.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
to say that those communist members, prominent member, were responsible and were representative is kind of a false narrative. It's an exaggeration. The question still stays on: is Mr. Solzhenitsyn ultimately blaming only those few Jews which were at the height of political power, who enacted and started and enacted some of the policies he condemns and says that are evil, or is he blaming the entire Jewish population? Okay, and yes, he describes some horrors, but if you take those horrors and you put them in context, you'll see the completely different picture, and that's the crux of the matter. Uh, Horrific
Mhm.
a horrific experience by themselves shouldn't negate the existence, or shouldn't, let's say, confirm the existence of that event. Okay, it shouldn't paint that event as completely evil or completely good. Okay, it's a nuanced and complex theme.
But basically, like when I was actually reading into the Gulag Archipelago, is just because the story that really kind of shook me from that regard was when he talked about Operation Keelhaul. Are you familiar with that one? Operation
Mm-hmm.
Keelhaul, where
Yep.
ex-Soviets were sent back to Russia and were essentially sent to prison camps, similar to like what the United States government did to the Jews, sending them back to Nazi Germany. Essentially, it's stories like that that I'm not taught about. Which when I read about them, and when I first listened, because it's an audiobook that I'm listening to, and when I first heard that, I had to rewind, and then I actually looked into it, and I found it absolutely horrific because stories like that I think need to be taught, not just because it's anti-communist, but because it's telling a story of what took place. Because there's a lot of places like in the DPRK that we still don't know a whole lot about. But yes, you might say I'm using these very extreme examples, but that's just what I have to go off of right now. These people are adopting a lot of the same principles that that Marx talked about. I mean, even Marx said some fairly uh terrible things about the Jewish people, or am I mistaken?
Not necessarily, and it really, I don't think the argument is truly whether Marx said or didn't said. We are talking about stuff that happened like 100 plus years ago.
Mhm,
Like back then, is not necessarily that it's good that it happened, but there were like a whole different set of standards.
mhm,
As if we look a little bit before the Nazi Holocaust,
mhm,
Hitler's Holocaust, uh, was with the Armenian genocide happened.
mhm,
Okay, and in Mein Kampf, there are passages, or Mein Kampf, or some Hitler wrote, and I believe it was in Mein Kampf,
mhm,
that yes, look at how the world powers are reacting to the Armenian genocide. Okay, and he was kind of emboldened by the silence and the denial and the excuses and turning a blind eye. Okay, we are talking about stuff that was the norm in high power politics 100 years ago. Okay, so not to dismiss or diminish the importance of those crimes, we kind of have to see them in that context, because right now, for example, in the United States, you have Guantanamo Bay,
mhm.
which for how long it was operated, it held a certain number of prisoners.
Yep.
We can easily compare that with the Gulag, but we also kind of have to compare it in size. And I think it was like 800 prisoners, or anyway, it was a way smaller number of prisoners than the number of prisoners that were in Gulag. Okay, so what I would like to point out is the amount of progress that was done between the, let's say, early 1900s, the 1920s, 40s, 50s. And if you look a bit into the Soviet Union kind of history, you would see that after a point they started dismantling these gulags, and they went on with other form of they moved away from these penal colonies and labor camps, okay, which were indeed very harsh, okay, but they kind of reformed the system, okay, and that should be sort of a, a next book for you to read, because yes, there are horrific things happening in the early years, but then see how those things stopped, shifted, changed, and improved. Okay, because ultimately we are talking about making things better. Not, hey, look, 100 years ago, USA dropped 2 atomic bombs on the Japanese or something like that. Okay, that is something that was happened back then. Very horrific thing. I'm not equating. I'm saying that
Yeah.
something
I'm
bad
listening. Yeah.
happened, extremely bad happened in the beginning of the 1900s. Did anything improved? Because ultimately this is what you and me should be arguing for improvement. Okay, I'm seeing and say, hey, Murica is doing that thing in a very bad, evil way. Let's agree and let's improve it. Okay, you are looking, hey, there are these, I don't know, Middle Eastern country, Eastern European or whatever countries which are doing these things bad. Let's agree and let's improve it. Because otherwise you can easily look at the Eastern European conflicts with the Ottoman Turks, and we would never see the end of that. Okay, the Ottoman Turks under the Ottoman empires came and literally wiped out not necessarily wiped out, but literally did horrific amounts of killings in Eastern Europe.
Yep.
But surprise, surprise, just I'm finishing now the point. The commies stopped that. The evil, even if you would say the evil communist party in certain countries, stopped that narrative. And now, plenty of these Eastern European countries, which were immensely suffered immensely at the hands of the Turks, of the Ottoman Turks, right now are pretty friendly with today's present day Turkey, because we understand, hey, that was stuff that was done like hundreds of years ago by a different regime. We are now better people. We can play soccer games together and visit each other countries, so on and so forth.
Well, it's great that that Soviet Russia has gotten away from those things, but there's once again two countries that still haven't gotten away from these practices, and that's China and the DPRK. And the DPRK, if you speak out against the government, or even if your neighbor overhears you speaking out to your government, you and 3 generations of your family gets locked away in a labor camp for the rest of your life. And this is really troubling right here. And there might be some countries out here that don't have those penalties right now. And we can make the same argument about like the wars that take place in the Middle East, but that's not it. We could make the argument is an economic reason, but it's also ideology, because the Shia and Sunni have been at war for centuries. This is an age-long ideology that's just been going on for centuries, and it's going to continue to keep going on. It's going to continue to spread, simply because you can have like countries like the UAE, which are highly successful right now, but then you're going to have other countries like that are in the Middle East that aren't quite successful right now, like Libya. Their government was toppled, and now they're actually resorting to slave labor right now. It's a real mess right now, but that's mostly because of and I'm not trying to equate all Muslims to the same, not by a long shot. It's about who's in charge. Again, it all kind of goes back to the corrupt people that are in charge, which I think is the main thing we should be focusing on. If there's corrupt politicians, they need to get voted out. To me, that's the best way to fix the problem where you're at. But even in our country, we have this problem where we may not necessarily like this guy, but because this person's not a Republican or a Democrat, I'm going to vote for them anyway. That's kind of like one of our problems. And I hate to be so critical, but I'm just calling it for what it is. Like, for example, there's one politician who nobody likes him, but yet he continues to get voted into office again, even though nobody likes him. But it's just because of his political affiliation, he still gets voted in. It's absolutely absurd. But again, that just kind of goes into the system of the corrupt people that are at a high echelon. And even if people say, well, under like a socialist or under a comment, the people might be equal, but there's still going to be people they answer to. There's still going to be people that are making more than them, and there's still going to be people that the wage gap is still going to be significantly different. And even though, yes, you've said that things have progressed since then, but you still got the workers that are at this level, but you still got the people in charge of the communist countries that are still doing way better than they are, and they didn't earn their income. It's just because they became president for life right there. Like Xi Jinping actually made himself president for life in his country, which I consider absolutely frightening. I mean, wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, I wouldn't go as far as frightening, but yes, it's a bit of troubling, worrisome. But yeah, borderline. I would be borderline in that area, correct? But see, this thing even abroad, as well as the local politics in your country or in my country, ties to or in present day or former days. I would like to tie it again with our personal power. We don't
Mhm.
have power. Okay, and that's my problem with capitalism. You can, and it's almost similar with the problem under the socialist or communist regime. I'm yet to hear, for example, present day communists explaining how would they stay away from the corruption. Okay,
Mhm.
what metrics and what sort of organization or policies, who watches the watchers or something, they would
Mhm.
implement to keep corruption away, or at least at a minimum. Okay, and my problem is, on the other end, is the fact that we don't have power. And like in the previous example we were talking about, with the lawyers being equal,
Mhm.
we need to start talking about a way in which you and me have power. Regardless from the region of the world we should have power in relationship with our government, and we should have power in relationship, real power in relationship with the corporations. And that's something that isn't present. It's predicated, it's promoted. Like you, for example, in the beginning said, hey, I'm a capitalist, but you don't have capital. Okay, so you don't have access to the same levers of power and the same amplifiers of power as Jeff Bezos or other bigger corporate folks. Okay,
Mhm.
so yes, you are on the side of that economical ideology or political ideology, but you don't have access to its lever, to its increase in power. Okay, so that's my issue. Let's look at ourselves as individuals without power, and let's build ourselves systems that allows us to have power, to really have power. Because otherwise, if I come to you and I have, the $10 billion lawyers, and you represent only by yourself, there is no equality, regardless if it's a democracy or it's socialism or whatever other system.
Well, but here's the reason why I still stay behind it is because I have the capabilities of one day I could create something, a commodity, a product, and let's say, for example, it takes off. Everybody's buying it like it's going out of style. I'm able to hire 1,000 workers. I open up 3 or 4 different warehouses across the country, and I become insanely rich. I became insanely wealthy. I should be rewarded for this, and I shouldn't be punished as long as I'm taking care of my workers, and as long as, like, if I expect, because that's what I would do. I would actually make sure that my workers are getting paid a decent wage. I would make sure that I have good managers that let me know if there's any problems involved. I would make sure that the product is being sold ethically. I wouldn't want it to get sent overseas for use of cheap labor, because I do have a problem with that. But that's probably another topic for another time, because that's a negotiation between the company and the country involved, whether it's like Vietnam or Thailand or China, whatnot. But again, if I was to create a system, I would make sure that if my system essentially would make sure that the ethics behind capitalism are kept true, and there would be accountability as well. I would want to make sure that each business owner is, you know, granting the same kind of opportunities as like any major corporation, because everybody does have that capability right now. Everybody has the ability to create a better commodity, a better product, and
Mm,
sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes a major corporation will buy the commodity and that family still gets insanely rich. We see it all the time. And these are the things I do appreciate about capitalism. Even if I never create a business, I know the potential is there. This is why I'm actually going into a free market job as well, to being a truck driver, because this is a business that was created from the ground up, and they're a very prominent business. But each person I've talked to about it, they said, you get treated like a person, you get treated like an individual. Is there a guarantee that every truck driving business or whatever business out there operates the same way? No, of course not. I'm just saying that we have these choices, we have these abilities to find these jobs that benefit us better. I mean, this is why I fully support it. While I can recognize the problems of capitalism, but look to the good examples and use that as a point of reference, that as a proof of concept. That's kind of why I'm such a staunch advocate for it.
Absolutely. Again,
Mhm.
I'm not. I didn't invite you here to say, "Oh, don't
Yeah.
be a
No, I
capitalist"
got
and
you.
stuff like that. No. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm totally okay. Plus, I'm talking about something that we should start researching and
Mhm.
should start working on, and maybe see it fulfilled, implemented in 1, 3, 5 years. Like the lawyer example or something.
Yeah.
To after a couple of years to have something to have again a conversation and see what we came up with. But my problem, let's take it a bit further
Sure.
into detail. I would say that right now, the way the capitalism system works, from idea to through the process of bringing a product to market, is geared to cutting costs at every corner and make it as efficient as possible. Okay, and not that is a problem. I want to point out that by doing it in the existing way, in this specific way, you don't have enough budget left to account for this better human face capitalism respect. Sorry, tell me again your expression of capitalism.
Socially
Good.
responsible capitalism.
Yes, socially responsible capitalism. Okay, you don't have budget for that because
Mhm.
that would mean like if you have a good procedure for, I don't know, writing code
Mhm.
and making iteration and upgrading the quality of that code, you
Mhm.
don't have a budget. You don't have a column where you say, "Hey, how do I ensure that my product is ethical? Do I ensure that the employees are treated ethically? The collaboration with there isn't a list of I want to buy only from other ethical suppliers, okay, and I open yellow books of the registry of ethical
Mhm.
supplier of this workforce or whatever I need
Yeah.
to be supplied with. You don't have this kind of infrastructure, and to say that you in your endeavor will start and think about it, it's a very nice and very noble. But if you reach the stage where you say, hey, I might need some money from a venture capital or from other form of finance, a bank or whatever other loans, a step beyond the friends, family, and fools. Okay, a
Mhm.
bit more organized, institutionally type of funds.
Mhm.
They would look at your budget, they would look at your predictions, and they will say, "Hey, what is this thing? Well, this is my socially responsible capitalism person who would be responsible with making our company responsible." Uh, yeah, how about we cut that? Because if we cut that, our margin of profit will definitely be higher.
Mhm.
Okay, and right now it's not a sellable. It's not sellable. Yes, we have performative slogans from big corporations going. We love this kind of sexual orientation. We like this type of people. This type of people matter. But I call that very performative, and ultimately I believe that is detrimental to what really these people need and want to achieve. Okay, so we still remain. Are you familiar with? I'm starting a company, and it will be next the next Uber type company, Uber of something.
Okay. Uber, Lyft,
Yeah,
services like
but
that.
yes, but there is a saying. Uh, to build a company which would be as disruptive as Uber was for taxi drivers, for the
Mhm.
cab industry. Okay, to apply the same principle and the same, it would translate to applying the same principles and metrics as Uber or Lyft. Okay, the problem is that ultimately Uber and Lyft were very problematic and are still very problematic companies in the way they treat their employees and the rights they give to their employees and the amount of money they are taking out from their employees and not sharing properly and so on. And ultimately, the employees are quite on the margin, are quite on the risk, if not below, and really into deep risk and deep trouble working for this type of companies. For example, in California, somebody was calculating that yes, that person is a driver for Uber, but and that person is making a profit. But if he starts adding costs, taxes and car maintenance rate, not rates, installments and other stuff, gas and so on, you don't make a profit, and you literally cannot make a profit with Uber. Okay, you are doing it, and in best case scenario, you might be on net zero at the end of the month. But they looked at what really was the breakdown spreadsheet of a Uber driver, and at the end of the month, that driver was going negative. Okay, so there is this cliche being your product being the Uber of next thing. Okay, but if you look at it, and this is something venture capitalist inclusive including Mark Cuban are looking when you go with your business to them. Can you disrupt this domain as well as Uber did? And you would love to say yes and receive that money, but that comes attached with the underlying, fine print, be as evil as Uber, treat your employee unfairly and so on and so forth.
So it's kind of funny you bring up that we talk about Uber and Lyft, because I recently utilized a Lyft service, right? And I talked to the driver about it because, I'd explored the idea of doing Lyft. And he says, the reason why a lot of people, don't get paid that much, it's because they're not taught how to make sure they do make a profit with it. Now, is this something that Lyft could teach and train? Absolutely. I think it's a great way, because this makes you smarter, honestly, because this guy talks about is like people will use their personal automobile. He says, what I did is I just went out and got myself a 4-door car, a 4-door SUV that is reliable. I did the research on it that has great gas economy. The maintenance on it is fairly inexpensive, and it's something that I can, it's easy for me to clean and take care of right there. And then on the side, he says, I drive a BMW for my personal car. I'm not going to use that for a Lyft. Some people like to use their BMW. They like to use an expensive car because they think I can charge this much. But at the end of the day, a BMW's maintenance is going to be worth more. It's the little things that people aren't looking into when they go into a business like this. They just take a jump right into it and think, I can make money this way without doing a lot of research into it. So a lot of it kind of comes down to the person that's finding the job. Now, is it a perfect solution? No. And again, this is something that Lyft or Uber could actually, okay, so here's a better way for you to invest right here. Here's a good example right here, okay? One of the trucking companies I was looking into was TMC. TMC is one of the larger flatbed trucking companies across the United States. Now, some trucking companies, they pay cents per mile. These guys pay percentages of the load right there. So sometimes, like, for example, if I was to drive for them and I picked up a load of sheetrock, and that sheetrock is going to be, for the company itself, like $5 per mile. Depending on the region I lived in, I could make a certain percentage of that. And let's say I make 26% of that. At the end of my trip, if it's from Texas to North Dakota, I would say I would make a pretty good profit off of that. Now, in some parts of the country, if I still work for TMC, I would get paid like 32% of the payload. Now, not every company operates like that, but it's all about the person that wants to get the job. I think a lot that plays into it is this the kind of environment you want to work for? And if not, and you need a job like right away, then yeah, you could still take that job and kind of find the opportunity that you're actually looking for. And again, it may not be perfect, but that's kind of like where the person that needs the job needs to look into, is this the kind of place I want to work for? And once again, kind of going to Lyft and Uber, it's knowing about what are the pros and the cons of working for a job like this. Is it better to work for Lyft or for Uber? Well, how do they take care of their drivers? How do they make sure to protect the driver in the event of a drunken, disorderly passenger? How are they going to make sure that they protect the driver? A lot of that kind of comes down to, should we train our drivers about this? And once again, I say they absolutely should.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm talking about, because ultimately Uber and other companies do have the budget to make this sort of app maybe open source, compare with other corporations, and give them for free to their employees and tell them, hey, look, this is how much money you made. Now put in the app how much money you spent on gas, and put how much money you spent on maintenance or repairs,
Mhm.
and add taxes. But the problem is, if they would have implement this level of transparency, uh, some of the driver might see, hey, this is the second month, the third month, and each time I'm not making a profit. I'm on the negative. I'm on minus. Okay, so with this level of transparency, you would see the abundance of drivers going down and shrinking, okay, and would be anti your capitalist interest to offer this sort of education and knowledge and empowerment to your employees.
Well, but again, it kind of goes back to my point of, you know, somebody that just jumps into a business and doesn't do the research on that, and the company's like, oh yeah, yeah, we'll hire you. Do you got a driver's license? Yeah. Well, but like the difference between like a taxi service, some taxi services hire and have very, 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 very low standards. Lyft and Uber actually have certain requirements that you have to meet in order to become a driver of their services. Some taxi companies don't have those prerequisites. Like some companies, they care if you have a bad driving record. Some taxi companies do not, and it's kind of like I know we're kind of getting into the weeds here, but I see where you're coming from as far as like people not understanding that they're not going to make a whole lot of money into this. But this is where it comes down to being responsible as far as like where your budget is and like balancing your budget. And if you're not happy where you're working at, you should be free to have a couple options. First off, you can talk to your employer, and if your employer tells you to kick rocks, I wouldn't want to work there where they told me to kick rocks. I would try to find a job where I was like, you know what, I'd much rather work here. Again, it's not a perfect solution right here, but these are the options that we have in this country, and these are the things that I do appreciate, even with all of its imperfections.
Well, that's my issue. I'm saying that the system is way far too imperfect. And for example, I'm not saying that only Uber should start this, or only Lyft, or other, TMC, or
Mhm,
other Amazon and stuff. But I would say that both all these companies and the government should put their money together and make a free app for every citizen. Okay, and hey, what are you going now? I'm thinking about starting sort of an estimate. I'm thinking of starting a job at Uber. Okay,
mhm.
look, how many trips do you think? How much money per month do you expect to make? This much amount of money. Okay, this much amount of money versus this much amount of hours, and this is estimated expenses. And if you put info in this app, in this type of app in the database from enough amount of people, then I never worked for Uber, but if I would consider, I would install the app on my computer, go on a browse website or something, go on my smartphone, look and, run some numbers for my
Mhm.
area. And I would say, hey, yeah, I'm comfortable with being on the negative at the end of the month, losing money for 2, 3 months, or I'm not comfortable with this kind of stuff. Okay, so this is the type of empowerment and transparency I'm saying that it's necessary to give to the people. Otherwise, we are still letting corporations have way too much power and withhold too much information, obfuscate, and put out PR campaigns and stuff like that, versus the common average guy who is literally powerless and doesn't have any meaningful stuff.
Well, again, I mean, you just kind of made my point in a way. It's like if the people run the numbers and realize, well, I don't want to drive for Uber because I'm not going to make this much money, they have the freedom to do so. And if Uber realizes, hey, we're losing employees fast. Why are we losing employees fast? Oh, well, because we're not paying these guys. Well, it looks like we need to change our business practices then. And then that might actually inspire them to change it. Is there a guarantee that's going to happen? There isn't. When it comes down to uh, jobs like this, business owners have to see the incentive. as do the people that they're trying to employ. They have to see the incentive. What is it that I can gain the most from this? And if you just say, well, we're going to give you a job and that's all there is to it, you're just going to have an income. People need to know, how is it, like, why should I work for this company? What makes this is what I did too. What makes it so appealing for me to choose this trucking company? I look at everything they have to offer, and I talk to people. Use social media as a means to communicate these things. And if I'm not sure about it, I call a recruiter. I call somebody that works for this company. Hey, tell me, what do you like about this company? And I honestly think people tend to just see dollar signs because they get to drive their own personal car and they think it's easy. I can just pick up people and just take them from point A to point B. That's easy. But they don't think about how much money they're going to spend on gas, how much they're going to spend on maintenance, how many miles they're going to drive, how much time they spend from family. Some of these people don't take these things into consideration. And again, I think a lot of personal responsibility comes into it. And again, I know that may not necessarily be the answer people want to hear, but some people don't necessarily need you know, they just need to have a better understanding of what they need to do to better themselves. And that means understanding the business you're getting into, understanding the enterprise you're getting into, understanding the company you're signing up with. I think that's just thinking you're going to make money right off the bat is foolhardy. You should know, this is what I'm going to make, but this is what I have to sacrifice in order to get to that point. I mean, are you just worried that people shouldn't have to sacrifice? They should just boom, make it, or what?
Okay, question for you. Would you think that such an app where you have a section with what kind of working hours the company has, what sort of their default contract, terms and conditions, the hiring contract with clauses, and a small, but let's say the C section with how much money would you make versus expenses and stuff like that. If you would have that sort of application app installed on you, be able to install it on your phone and go through it during 1 day or 2 day or something like that, couple of hours, do you think that would be beneficial for you?
Are you talking about, okay, I just want to make sure I understood this. You're asking me if I had like an application that I put on my phone that showed me how much I would make, how much I would earn, how many hours I would work, and this would help me determine whether I want to take this job or not. Is
Yes,
that what you're
including
asking?
type. Yes, including the type of contract, their default contract. Maybe you would have some extra.
That'd be stellar. That'd be great. I mean, I honestly, I would look at that and I was like, this is it's kind of like using consumer reviews, something that my wife and I used to buy some of our appliances we have. We used consumer reviews and we just went by, is this the best product to use for the money you spend? And I like stuff like that. So if that was something they offered, yeah, I'd be okay with that, because then if a business starts to fail because other companies are doing better than they are, then maybe they can learn from that and say, well, guess what? Maybe we need to change course. Maybe we need to do better for our businesses. I mean, I'd be okay with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and would you find it valuable if you would make it available for kids, maybe at 14, at the age of 14 or something like that, or even earlier, to say, hey, kid, look, this is the app, and look through it. Dad, I want to be, I don't know, to pilot planes or something.
Mhm.
Okay, this is how much money you would make. This is how much you would train, and make this kind of information like what you are saying earlier. Be knowledgeable and educate yourself about the job. But what I'm saying is that the job and this education is the domain is pretty large, and if you don't have a proper experience to what you can look for, what should you look for, what are red flags, and so on and so forth, you might not see them, and you find yourself in the job, and 3 months later you say, like, yeah, maybe it's not for me, but you already wasted 3 months, invested, went through all the troubles, and maybe got some legal ties now, and lots of additional things, negative things, can be associated at the end of 3 months, 6 months,
Oh,
1 year,
sure.
so on. But if both of us would have access to this kind of app, okay, I believe that we would greatly improve the quality of how the working force is thinking about that job, and without forcing the companies to change, we would be in the position to make way better decision, more informed decision, and thus without putting the government to force, using the government to force them, we ourselves, we would force the corporation to change because we would have information and power and the ability to choose, to really choose, not to.
Hey, it is, that's the way the cookie crumbles. I mean, if it forces them to change, just like, you know what, we need to change course, you know, awesome, that's great. So so
Look, well, I'm gonna throw it in here. I will make a draft or of such an app or website.
mhm.
Would you be willing to look on it, and if you like to, let's say, throw it out to ask people to say to have them come in and give ideas and make an open document and maybe put some form of a sketch of it together and give it to,
Sure.
I don't know, maybe a school to test it or something like that. Because ultimately, I would like from this conversation to have something more than, hey, I'm a communist, I'm better than
Mhm.
capital. The level of debate bro kind of discourse. Let's see if we can have something that will spill into real world
Mhm.
practical things that.
Yeah, instead of extremes.
Yeah, exactly. Instead
Yep.
of just exchanging gotcha moments and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah, I
Okay,
mean,
let's see if we. Doesn't have to be the perfect idea, but
mhm.
it's something that we. I'm gonna write down a small version, give it to you, and let's say if people get involved, feedback, let's see what it can grow into.
Sure, I'm down with it. Yeah, I'll give you my email address after this. So
Yeah, awesome, awesome. I would have some other point about the very large disproportion
mhm.
in power. Are you? What's your position on sort of police brutality, or what's your view? How do you view the interactions between police and citizens
So
within
uh,
the United
yeah,
States, of course?
within the United States. Okay, so I respect the police immensely, but at the same time, I think some of them get away with way too much. The death of Daniel Shaver is a prime example. The death of George Floyd was that what took place after the death of George Floyd was inevitable. It didn't have to be George Floyd. It could have been anybody, honestly. And I just think that, while I do respect the police, I think at times their rules of engagement are a little bit excessive at times. If I wanted to look at an ideal police force, I look at the German Polizei. Are you familiar with them?
Yeah,
They're very professional. They're multilingual, um, but they will not hesitate to put you in your place. But they know when to stop. I mean, I can't think of too many cases where a Polizei went too far. Um, I've I wouldn't say they're intimidating, but they're very knowledgeable, they're very respectful, and they're very helpful. And I've seen plenty of police officers in this country that are respectful and helpful and cordial. But then you got the ones that get the most attention. And I think the media kind of plays a lot into it because you hear more of the stories of the police that are doing bad things than you'll hear about the police doing good things. Do I think there needs to be police reform? Absolutely. I think there needs to be more strict standards, and outside investigations need to be conducted in order to find out if there's corruption within the police department, if they're just letting something slide by, like police brutality. Like, if there's any a case, an accusation, it should immediately be investigated because the optics of it is what's damaging right now. And people see this stuff and they're horrified. They're horrified by, the death of Daniel Shaver, who was a threat to nobody, and they're horrified by the death of Eric Garner and, George Floyd. But people like to bring up the fact that these guys had criminal records, but they didn't have criminal records at that point. They weren't committing a crime at that point when they were being detained. And I think it's really unfortunate that we still have to have these kinds of conversations, but we do. And I think, you know, is it possible that race plays into it? Yes. Is it also a possibility that, economic clash plays a lot into it? Yeah. Because you don't see, you know, politicians or extremely wealthy people get treated the same way as you see like a lower class citizen treated. Is that what you were kind of getting at?
yeah, yeah, somewhere in this area.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
I'm asking because I believe the way the police treats the public outside the, not trying to diminish these famous
Mhm.
cases, but I believe these famous cases, famous in a gruesome kind of way, are only a small minority. Because if we look at the everyday interactions between police and your every citizen, the police is not always, but in large numbers, trying to escalate very small infractions into something bigger because
Mhm.
stats, and they want to pose because they catch caught the next drug trafficker, although you only had the whiff
Sure.
of something. So what I'm trying to get to is, again, you as a citizen don't have any ways to meaningfully stop this thing from escalating and ultimately damaging doing economical damage upon you, inflicting psychological trauma, and of course up to taking your life or being having you imprisoned and stuff like that. So what I'm saying is that yes, police has all these steps in their training manuals, so to say. But
Mhm.
ultimately, we as citizens, we don't have any training manual. Okay, and
Mhm.
if some police officers does something wrong towards a citizen, like in the same way the corporation might, poison your water, it can take years or decades for you to reclaim your good name and expunge any wrongdoings and uh, maybe in some cases receive some form of compensation. And again, this is me trying to properly paint a huge uh, level of I say the disproportionate levels of powers.
Mhm.
Okay, because if you, I don't know, drive 70 in a 50 or something like that, yes, that's a minor infraction. Of course, you didn't want to do that, but that can easily be transformed and escalated into something that takes away years of your life or
Mhm.
makes you pay lots of huge amounts of money, and you don't have any meaningful way to stop that. Okay, and this is me saying that we don't have the power. Yes, technically you would go to trial, judge, courts, and so on and so forth, but that takes time, money, and power
Mhm.
away from you. For something that should be done in less than 30 days, it takes months or years. Okay, so that's what I'm getting to, the same level of inequality. What should we do to change that and to make the gap smaller?
To make the gap smaller, I mean,
Hmm.
that's just I really wish I had an answer for that. I mean, because the only way I look at it, if you want to try to make it smaller, the only way that you could make it smaller is if by force. That's the only way that you could possibly do that. And that's what would scare me more than anything, because if you can justify taking away something from somebody because you felt they didn't deserve it, but you might only do it for like one corporation, but the second you justify doing it to one person, you can justify doing it to anybody, especially if you're using government force. And even if you had people doing this, right? if you let if you give some people an inch, they'll take a mile. Because we talk about how, well, we let these corporations do it. Well, next thing you know, you're going to have one group of people say, well, we got away with this time, so let's do it again right here. Why not? I mean, nobody's really going to stop us. So my biggest solution right here is just, if you have rules, you have to enforce these rules. If you have regulations, you have to enforce them. And if you don't enforce them, you don't deserve the business. You don't deserve to be in power. You don't deserve to be a police officer. That should be so simple, but it's so much harder to ensure that, some people follow these rules because they'll pay it out, the police department will pay it out. No, you need to just hold the individual responsible, and if they fail once again, you got to crush them. I mean, I'm not talking about like actually kill them, I'm talking about make sure they don't work in that department again. But at times I think people are too afraid to hold these regulations because they're worried about the optics that's going to happen. Honestly, I think the more people see that accountability is being done, the more faith they might have in the system, and it might actually help them make the right decision to hire the right people or to find the right police commissioner, police chief, or the right police officers to hire. I think this could actually lead to better ethical standards being upheld by enforcing the standards that actually keep the checks and balances in place. That's just what I personally believe.
Well, I'm let me be blunt. I
Okay.
believe that it is very naive sort of
Okay.
view. Because, okay, let's say we have a smaller, we have a town, and one, I don't know, it was recently a case in which a lady, an old lady with some sort of mental issue, Alzheimer or something, was walking on the side of the street, and
Yep.
one cop
They
pulled the thing with broken arm,
mhm.
sitting later.
Yep.
Yeah, that very horrific
They were
incident.
they were
Okay,
high-fiving too. So, I
yeah, oh, yeah,
disgusting.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And I would say, hey, okay, you would throw those like 3, 5 people, you throw them in jail. And you
Mhm.
discover that, yes, the city attorney is also a bit shady, and you fire the city attorney too, and the judge, and you throw out lots of people. But you don't have enough people to fill the jobs. Okay, you
Yep.
don't have readily available. So the idea that we yes, a part of the police reform is to fire these people, and I would agree that those people
Mhm.
shouldn't be anywhere in the uniform. Okay, we simply don't have enough people in the society. Okay, so we kind of need to come really to formulate, to be able to articulate a better solution, and pretty fast, because otherwise, like the protests, the Black Lives Matter protests are saying,
Mhm.
yes, defund the police. And if you ask them, yes, technically defund the police should mean police reform, but if you push further, you don't really hear what exactly that police reform is or means. There isn't a 10-point list, say, look, this
Yep.
is the police reform list or
So
something,
you
okay?
so you want the people to hear about what the ideas are, which I'd
Y-
be in agreement on.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'd be in
Yes.
agreement with you. I mean, because and it's fine that you just think it's a naive way to look at things, but I just, anytime people say it's like, well, if we fire this guy, we don't have, but well, I just look at it like this as well. What are you going to do about it then? I look at things like here's like an analogy I use a lot nowadays. I call it the 3-foot wall excuse. Some people see the first sign of an obstruction, a 3-foot wall in front of them, and they say, well, I can't get around this wall, so I'm just going to turn around and go back. There's always a way to get around any problem whatsoever. I'd say it's the year 2021. I think some people just give up too easily, which I think is a huge problem. And that's just not it's not just in the American society, it's across the world. People just see the first sign of conflict and they just run away from it, or they just think, well, we tried once and we're just going to go with the full nuclear option. I mean, not really saying nuclear, but they're just going to go straight for the
Mhm.
jugular. There are so many different ways and paths to get across it, but it's just people tend to just say, well, it's not going to work this time. We're just going to give up. I think that's untrue. I don't believe in a scenario which you cannot find a better solution to solve a problem unless it's completely out of your control and you've exhausted all options. Then maybe yes, we can talk about that. But some people just don't even try. They just, well, we tried and just kind of gave up. I don't believe in that, honestly. I've given up many times in my own personal life, but it's just I just think there are ways to figure out how do we solve these problems with police reform? How do we solve these problems with corrupt judges? And some of these corrupt judges actually have been thrown in prison and they've done some checks and balances there and they've installed better judges like Brock Turner. That judge that gave him that slap on the wrist for raping a woman behind a dumpster was actually ousted and voted out because he was such a terrible judge. So it's no justice for the victim, but at least that guy is not going to be practicing law anymore. Because my heart really goes out to her because she did not get any justice whatsoever. The justice system failed her, but that judge is no longer practicing now, which I'm completely okay with. So
Mhm. Okay, that's good to know. So,
yep.
in relation with the power levels and exchange of power ratio between you as a citizen driving from work or whatever
Mhm.
to another place and the cop. How about would you again have an app on your phone and the cop would also have an app and when the cop knocks on your window and you roll it down a bit, you have the app in front of you and say, hey, police officer is required to present himself. Did the police officer, I don't know, introduced himself with name and badge number or whatever is required in the state? Yes, no. Okay, and then you press no because he started spewing something, and then he is making statements that are false. Okay, and that's a point when you press no again, and
Mhm.
then he kind of receives, maybe he receives a call.
Mhm.
Hey, dude, take it down a notch and de-escalate, or maybe he also have his smartphone and he says, hey, I in front of his webcam or body cam, and says,
Yep.
hey, I have introduced myself. Click, check. Now I'm informing the driver why the reason for the stop. Check.
Mhm.
I'm asking for the papers. Check. Do you think that this could be up until a point a very good third party option to make both parties sort of equal and have accountability for both the police officer and for the driver?
Yep. Before I answer that, I will need to go soon. So, but I just want to give
Oh,
you a heads up on that. So,
okay.
but anyway, to answer your question,
Like,
I
1 second. Like, how much time? 5 minutes or something?
5 minutes is, yeah. So, but I will answer your
Oh,
question
okay.
though. So, yeah.
Sure.
So when it comes down to it, the only reason why I wouldn't go for that is because first things first, a police officer needs to be able to react. Some of these police officers overreact at times. Yes, this is true. Do I think that there should be a means to protect the citizen and the police officer? Well, that's what the body cams are for, but they don't always work. Should there be like a secondary means to which somebody can protect themselves in the event that a police officer is being professional? Absolutely. I don't necessarily think an app would do it because like a police officer already has enough steps to go through. He or she has to go through. If they're just like writing a ticket, they already have to focus on that. If they have to de-escalate the situation, they already have to focus on that. But then they also have to focus on if this person, let's say for example, if this isn't even a person that's in good faith. We'll just say this is somebody that just, they have an illegal weapon inside their car and they're terrified that they're about to get caught. And the cop is so busily fumbling with this app, this person sees the opportunity and then shoots the cop. That's one of the reasons why I see that not going so well. But should there be a secondary system that protects the citizen as well as does the cop? Absolutely. Because this is the best way for us to find out. I think an app would be too distracting because if you see our society right now, society is already distracted by these phones. Like you look around everywhere, you see people on their phones all the time. We are so addicted to this stuff, and I have a feeling this would actually lead to more complacency, especially being a police officer. But I do think that there could be a way to fix things to ensure checks and balances. But I don't think an app is the way to go. So that's the only reason I would kind of go against that, if that's fair.
Yeah, sure. Okay, or maybe not necessarily the cop to fumble with the phone, with the tablet or something, but
Mhm.
definitely the person driving the car.
Sure.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
click. Yes, the officer, he gave me his name. He told me this. Yes, and stuff like that. And
Yep.
that's why the like how the citizen could keep himself calm. Yes, the
Sure.
officers did this and did that, and
Mhm.
ultimately it would give us, after a while, a huge enough database of things that the police officers specifically did or didn't do outside of the famous cases, and we would really have a body of information to have even more informed opinion upon
Sure.
this.
Absolutely.
Man,
So
let's leave it here and pick it up
yeah.
again some other
Yeah.
time. I
Absolutely.
did enjoy talking with you. If you have any last
Absolutely.
thoughts or
No, I thought this was a great conversation. It's a great time to for us to collaborate in good faith and express our ideas and find solutions to these problems that we addressed, which I think is really important. I think there needs to be more of this, even if we don't agree based on our ideology. It's good to still exchange these ideas because at the end of the day, we're all citizens of this world, and we can always come together to find a solution to the problems that we address. So I appreciate the opportunity, and thanks for bringing me on.
Thank you, Alex. Again, I started this because I'm not going to bring communism in 10 years or something, okay? And you are not going to make capitalism better in like 6 months. But during our lifetime, if we collaborate, I believe we can come up with things to make whatever system, economical, political, ideology, better and leave something better for our kids and the other folks around us.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you for coming. Thank you everybody for listening, and see you next time.